Fantastic. Well, hello and happy Tuesday. My name is Cedra Duflon-Heidi, and I am the current Vice Chair of the Foundation's Board of Directors. On behalf of Chris Kamanishi, our Board Chair, and all of the members of our board, we welcome you to the 2024 Washington Women Foundation Annual Meeting. We would like to begin today, the day after Indigenous Peoples Day, with an acknowledgement of the land on which our foundation sits. As always, please remember that our time together is first framed with an acknowledgement that this land we all love is stolen land. We are gathered on a stolen and unceded homeland within the context of broken treaties and unresolved harms to Indigenous peoples. Here in Seattle, we are on the land of the Duwamish people and of the Coast Salish, the Stillaguamish, the Duwamish, the Muckleshoot, and the Suquamish, who have made and continue to make their homes around the magnificent Salish Sea in the shadow of the great mountain Tahoma. We must also recognize that we live, work, play, and learn in a nation and a state of great wealth, a nation with wealth created by the subjugation and exploitation of African peoples brought to this land through chattel slavery, a state with wealth that stands indebted to exploited Chinese immigrants who built the railroads, to Japanese Americans whose livelihoods were stolen in the internment camps of World War II, and to immigrants and migrant workers who, to this day, labor in the rich fields and farms across our prosperous state. We honor and uplift here today the original Indigenous stewards of this land, the forced contributions from generations of Africans, and the exploited labor of immigrant and migrant workers yesterday and today. As we think here together, I ask you to acknowledge the stolen land and stolen labor and recognize that the impact of these wrongs reverberates and in many cases is still being perpetuated into our present day. In fact, we'll be wrestling directly with many of those reverberations in our 2025 priorities. So we'll be getting to that later. We now want to move into the content for today, and I am going to kick us off with just a little bit of an overview of our agenda. A bit different from years past. We are going to be doing this in a bit of a chronological order. For those of you that have attended in the past, our financial position is actually our financial position at the end of 2024. And of course, we are now in at the end of 2023, and we are now in October of 2024. We're going to be talking about 23, 24, and 25 today. So a bit about our financial position at that close of the year, our current position, and some information about sort of trends and ways that we've gotten here. Maria is going to talk more about our financial model and some of the pressures on that model. And then we're going to talk about the road ahead, some of the things that the board is thinking about and working on this year and into 2025. We're then going to vote for our new slate of board candidates. We're going to talk about the 2025 collective grant process and some changes there. And we're going to share the 2025 funding and learning priorities. So we've got a lot to cover. We also are going to leave ample time for Q&A today. As well, you probably saw in an email earlier that we'll be holding another session on Friday at noon as well. So if there's questions that come up from folks that can't join us today or things that come in after you've had some time to reflect, you'll have space for that both today and later this week. So I am now going to turn it over to Maria to talk a bit about our financial position.
Thank you, Cedra. Thank you. All right, we're going to dive right in because we have a lot to get to today. I do appreciate you all for coming. So we're going to take a look at our financial position, and we're going to be taking a look. Usually I used to put it up just 1 year at a time, but this year we're going to look at 22 and 23 side by side. So you can sort of see the changes that have happened. And then we'll be talking about the implications of those changes for much of the rest of the meeting. So to begin with, however, we'll need to have some definitions so we're all clear on what it is I'm going to be talking about. So please don't forget to mute yourselves. So today it's really important that we all understand a few terms in the same way. Unrestricted resources. Our unrestricted resources are made up of working capital and the board discretionary fund. The board discretionary fund, so it's really clear what that is an investment account that holds investments and cash assets that are under the control of the board. Technically, they aren't restricted, but the use of those funds has to be designated by the board. The board it has control over whether or not those dollars are released. Our working capital is all the financial assets that are not restricted or designated, available for use for operations and for cash flow. So, sometimes a grantee might ask for all of their gifts in one go. That's a tight time of year because most of our dollars come in at the end of the year. So this working capital is there for us to go ahead and pay those out in a timely fashion and then replenish those coffers as our gifts come in at the end of the year. So that's what working capital is. Restricted resources. Unlike unrestricted resources, these are financial assets that are donated with restrictions that have been imposed by the donor, by an outside person. And they can only be used for specific purposes as designated by that donor. So for instance, all the gifts that are given specifically for the Women's Funding Alliance Fund can only be used for programs supporting women and girls in Washington State. Please remember these as we go forward. I will be using these terms. I want to make sure that we all understand what they are. So going on, here's the 2022 audit and the 2023 audit. And I wanted to walk you through this a little bit. Our membership contributions right there at the top, that includes both our memberships and anything contributing to the annual fund, any contributions to that annual fund. As you can see, we had slightly more in 2023. Our requests were less, but of course we don't budget for those. Our sponsorships were about double. People are really beginning to respond to the pop-up for women and girls as a sponsorship opportunity, which is exciting. The endowment is, of course, dictated by market forces. So the dollars that come out of that are dictated by market forces. And we take an average over 3 years before we pull out the 4% that is designated from that. The restricted contributions right here, basically, you'll see a big difference, right? You'll see here in 2022, it was $265,000 that came in with restricted revenue as opposed to this year. This was primarily the Women's Funding Alliance, the final payout from them. Grants awarded. The interest we also don't budget for. That's completely driven by the market. Grants awarded a little more in 22. Oops. I apologize. I just slipped way past where I want to be. There we go. Grants awarded a little more in 2022. I believe we had some additional discretionary grant funds available that year. And just a quick note about programs, events, management, general, and fundraising lines. Those lines include our staff costs as well. So if staff is focused on a particular area, or if they are doing more work in one area than another, their salary during those hours is allocated to one of these lines. Programs and events. I'll get to what happened there in just a minute. It did go up. Management and general. This includes some increases in healthcare costs, vendor expenses, insurance, and our lease. We have a new property manager and they did raise the rent. It's still very reasonable, but they did raise it, and they also do not pay for as many things as our last property manager did. So we now have to pay for our own phone lines, a few other items that used to be included in our rent. Fundraising. I spent a little more time in 2023 doing some fundraising than I had in 2022. So some of that increases my time. And of course, going out into the world to meet with people also comes with a cost. Sometimes you got to buy lunch before you can get to that next space. So that is the revenue and expenses. Brings us to our net income operating activity, right? That net income operating activity is the revenue minus the expenses. All right, so that's a little definition. Please don't forget to put yourself on mute. $500,000 for the restroom repair awards was pulled out of the board discretionary fund both of those years, which you'll see better on the next slide. And that accounts for some of that negative number. Remember, this is money we had on hand already, that restroom repair money, right? So it didn't show up in the revenue line, even though it was available for us to spend. So it's not in the revenue. It's like the savings account that was on the side. So when you subtract expenses from revenue, it's not taking into account the fact that you already had that money sitting in the bank. We did have a little money come in for the endowment, but we had some nice returns on our portfolio last year. So our total change in net assets in 2023 was actually less of a drop than our change in net assets the year before. All right, so here's where you see that board discretionary fund and the working capital that I mentioned before. Money available to us that isn't in the revenue line. And here's where you also see the depth of our financial position, and our position is strong. Right? We're in a good position. That's set. We have used some of our working capital to offset additional costs in operations and to fulfill some of our grant commitments. Our unrestricted assets, the board discretionary fund and the working capital, at the end of 2023 was only almost $1.3 million. So I want you to still understand that we're in a strong position. But it is not as strong as it was the year before. And those two funds were nearly $2 million. The biggest difference here is that the amount of unrestricted resources, the board discretionary fund and the working capital, have gone down substantially. And I will tell you, this year it looks like it will be even lower. Unlike in some past years, we have not had as many surprise major gifts, and our annual fund is down. We have, I think, 32 new members as of right now, but we've also lost members, as we do every year. That's going to have an impact on our bottom line, and it may mean taking more from working capital to sort of shore up our operations. That's what it's there for. I also wanted to remind you that our endowment, some people have said, but we have all that money in the endowment, but accessing that is not always available. That we only use a certain percentage of the earnings. So it's not really accessible dollars. For this annual meeting, I want to speak very frankly about a weak spot I am seeing in our financial model, one that is starting to impact that strong financial position that you just looked at. This is not going to be a new revelation. I have talked about this before, but this time I want to really underscore it all for all of you and invite you in to be part of the conversation the board and I will be having for the next year on how to address it. I want us to decide on our strategic course of action before that weak spot I'm seeing in our model itself starts to deeply impact our financial health. I want to be out in front of the issue, and I want you with me on the journey. So let's take a look at our model. So in our strategic plan from 2017, the board laid out that we needed to develop a financial model that incorporates power sharing, flexibility, and sustainability, and supports the growth of an inclusive collective of women. The board recognized that we had a flexibility and sustainability weakness within our model because our financial structure is neither flexible nor sustainable. And let me show you what I mean. We've defended a long time on memberships, our endowment payout, and a lot of unpaid volunteer labor from all of you to run this organization. And we've padded out that pretty limited set of resource lines with some haphazard annual funded major gift work, some restricted donations, tickets, and sponsorships. We have also, as I've mentioned, had access to unrestricted dollars in our working capital and board discretionary fund. We have spent those resources in several different ways on personnel, on collective grants, on education and events, the vendors we need and the resources and services we require, our facilities and operations, and we have from time to time done some additional grant making. If you look at our three most dependent upon resources, volunteers, endowment, and memberships, and you look at our three most visible expenses, grants, staff, and our educational events, side by side, the weakness becomes clear. I went back 10 years and did just that, and looked at these items side by side. The gray-blue line is resources. The orange one is expenses. The two brackets, the two big long lines around 2020 and 2021 are, of course, the pandemic, when much of our event activity was online. What do you notice? I'll tell you what I noticed. I noticed our memberships and endowment resources have, in the last 10 years, never covered the cost of even our grants and personnel and events. And I have not even added rent or computers or like the internet. Our model is fragile. Its dependence on membership has not been sustainable for some time. We have traditionally not been an organization that did a lot of systematic strategic fundraising. We covered costs with haphazard annual fund giving, special gifts from members when they had a personal windfall or they passed away and gave a bequest. For many years, as you may recall, we didn't pay our staff living or thriving wages, and we also used to not guarantee our grant size amount. We only gave whatever dollars we raised and had available from the previous year. I'll point out, because I think this question is out there, that even in 2015, when we had almost 500 members and brought in the most membership revenue ever, even then, right here, 2015, we didn't break even. Our membership resource has not paid for our expenses for at least 10 years. And after looking at this, I have to be really honest, I begin to wonder if it ever did. I talk about this with our consulting firm and some experts in the field. And they all let me know that, in fact, membership organizations are inherently unstable and that this pattern was something they saw often. Membership organizations demand constant growth, and they demand that constant growth for two reasons. One, people are always leaving for all kinds of reasons. And two, because there's this pesky reality called inflation. You might notice that in the last few years of this chart, the stretch between expenses and membership has gotten bigger. You don't really see it in 2021 because we weren't having in-person events. Notice that we still didn't crack even without that expense. But let me show you what happened with inflation during this same time period. So right over here, these are the early years when the orange and gray in the last slide was a little closer together. But these last 4 years coming out of the pandemic, this is also where our orange and gray lines get further and further apart. And here's the thing. We were still not in person very much in 2021 when you see this 7%. We didn't start upping our event activities until 2022. But the inflation from 2021 was already by that point baked into those expenses, and it only went up from there. We have no control over inflationary pressures. Surprise! Okay, but we could cut and cut and cut, but eventually, if your resources don't go up, you will not cover your expenses. And right now, our resources are not going up, and our expenses are. It is an unsustainable situation. I promise this is not all doom and gloom today. I promise. Just bear with me. There is one other weakness inherent in depending primarily on memberships to stay ahead of inflation. You either bring in a lot more members every year. Our consultant determined that we would need 50 new members every single year without losing any members to attrition to do this sustainably. Or you would need to raise your membership price. Our classic membership has been $2,500 for 14 years, since 2010. I took a look back at what the buying power of $2,500 in 2010 would be for now, or rather, what's the equivalent of $2,500 in today's dollars. I want to know what our membership would have to be in order to cover our costs, with the caveat that that number would change every time the cost of living did. $2,500 14 years ago is worth almost $3,600 today. And remember, that number will always need to increase because inflation is a thing. We were doing okay, and that split wasn't astronomical prior to the pandemic. But look what happens in 2021 and 2022 and beyond. Our average membership did go up a little in 2023 because our new $5,000 membership level and enough members upgraded to that level that it brought our average up to $2,538 from $2,500. But it's nowhere near the $3,558 that those dollars are worth now. Here's the thing. I've been doing a lot of talking with other women's collective giving organizations similar to ours. In fact, I spoke to one in particular with a membership of $7,500, right? They've increased considerably, and they are facing the same problem. On a different scale than us, they have more staff, they have bigger grants, but on an identical pattern and an identical realization that a set membership alone is not sustainable of probably any size. So we're not the only ones wrestling with this conundrum. We do have to figure out how to fix it, however. They haven't figured it out either, by the way, and we have a promise into one another that, like, once one of us figures out what the secret is, we'll just call the other person. So if they figure it out, great. Right now, this is what we're working on. because I want to speak to how it is that we've made it work, because we have made it work, right? And I think the root of our solution to this fragility in our model is in this mix. It's on this page. We have covered all the costs of running Washington Women's Foundation, including paying our vendors and facilities and et cetera, without going into debt, by using resources that we have, but we don't systematically pursue. We do some gentle annual fund suggestions. We've added ticket pricing recently. And you saw in the audit, we've been pursuing sponsorships a little more aggressively. And yes, we've been spending out of our working capital, a little out of our board discretionary fund to cover costs. We still have more in both of those places. We still have money in the bank to hold out in bad weather, but this is no longer a weather situation. This is a climate change situation. It's not a blip. It's the new reality. Our reality. In the words of the consultant we called in to look at this, and I did call them in part so that I could get confirmation on what I was seeing. Our reality is that our foundation does not have a systematic fundraising or marketing culture. And we're probably going to have to do something about that. It's time we realize that, yes, we are in fact a nonprofit. And yes, we have some capacity building of our own to do. We need a flexible, sustainable model for our funding. By flexible, I mean we will need to strengthen these other revenue lines that and I want to be sure you understand this, we are already doing these things, but we haven't really activated them to their full extent. We need to build our capacity to raise money to do the things we want to do. Now, I know people who will say, can't we just cut expenses? And of course, yeah, sure. In fact, I have to tell you, if the end of the year does not improve pretty substantially, we will be doing that next year. It will look different. There will probably be some cuts, but you can't cut your way out of this. To be honest, our biggest expenses, as I pointed out earlier, are grants and personnel. And this organization would look very different were we to radically cut back on either of those. So we'll need to look at those other revenue lines and probably make some changes. And remember, we've made a lot of changes over the years. One last thing before Cedric gets back up here, I want to speak to one other change happening around us that could also impact the decisions we want to make. In 1996, we were founded as a collective of women pooling their resources to make grants and learn how to be strong philanthropists. Obviously, that was pretty successful because here we are 30 years later, still looking pretty good, all things considered. But our demographics are changing. The world is changing. Much of the work done to run the foundation in the past was borne by members. Members organized our discovery days, our events, our celebrations. In the days prior to paid staff, we were run out of the Seattle Foundation as a kind of donor-advised fund. So the Seattle Foundation managed our money and our investments, our contributions, our grant distribution. When we moved from the Seattle Foundation, we had some minimally paid staff and a trove of volunteers who put in full-time hours on our activities and inner workings and operations. Much of this work is now done by paid professional staff. And part of the reason for this is that our member demographics were already changing at the same time. Women today are coming to us unable or unwilling to do as much volunteer work as our members in the past had the time or wherewithal to do. We had 40 people on our grant committee last year. We used to have 70. And that's okay, right? You do not have to volunteer to be a full member here. And we're not alone in this drop in volunteer activity. Since the pandemic alone, volunteering by women in particular across the country has declined by 8%. In Washington state, overall volunteering dropped from 35.7% of the population in 2017 to 25% in 2021. To put it baldly, our members are now increasingly coming from a group of high-powered working women who do not have the time or space to do the level of volunteering our past members were able to do. And as the hours they were able to put in on membership recruitment, on event planning, on community outreach, on operations, as that time available has declined, paid staff have picked up the slack. Paid professional staff who need to be paid professional wages and offered cost of living increases, which are high when inflation climbs. Cutting costs and personnel will have a real ramifications on the operations and the reach and the workings of the foundation itself that must be considered as we think strategically about our future. We have a lot of thinking to do this upcoming year, and things might look different, maybe even really different. Are we going to figure it out? Of course we are. Things just might be a little weird for a while. And lucky me, Cedra's going to talk about that part. Cedra, tell them all about it.
Well, hopefully you all also had the opportunity to see my email, and we're definitely echoing more of that. But Maria, thank you. Thank you to you and your team for all the work that you put into the presentation today, all the work that you've been doing to get us to this point of realization of where we are and really landing in the reality of our situation, which is a moving and evolving thing. So what do we want you guys to take away from today? What we really want you to take away are three big themes. We're a learning organization, and change is part of how we've always done our work and how we're going to continue to do our work together. We're in need of a new strategic plan, as our world, our foundation have changed significantly in the last 9 years since we started on this last and current plan. And that the next year is going to be a time of reflection, but also action. At our core, we're an organization about bringing women together to give collectively. We're curious, intelligent, motivated, and innovative women who can do more together than we can as individuals. So before us, there are these three main pieces of the foundation for us to assess. Our funding model, what comes in, and then our grant making and our education programming, the what goes out. As Maria has said, as you're going to keep hearing from us, our current funding methods are not able to support our desired level of grant making and other programming. The opportunity now is to rethink how we will move forward together. Changes could look like a lot of different things, and the board is starting to work with these, not starting, have been working, but continuing to work. But we're looking at a variety of things. Those could look like adjusting our funding model through greater fundraising, as Maria shared, maybe more and different membership or gift levels or other new streams of revenue that we haven't yet encountered. We could be looking at changing our grant making, giving more smaller grants, granting in different cycles, granting in themes, doing other ways of that grant making work, which is core to who we are. We can also look at modifying our programming, doing things at different times, in shorter commitments, and in hybrid models. Many opportunities in front of us, and I'm excited about the new members joining our collective and the energy of our continuing members toward these efforts. As a foundation, we're sharpening our focus on new ways to communicate with the membership and more broadly with our larger community, how to think about our funding and ways to be more sustainable, and exploring how our members wish to contribute their time and talent. As a board, we're responsible for the strategy of this organization, and we are all members of this collective, just like all of you. So what do we want the foundation to commit to? How do you want to see us use our collective voices, dollars, and time? Over the next year, you're going to see us asking a lot of questions, trying out more new things, and reflecting on what is working and what is not. Because this is a year for discussion and action. So we're glad that you're here. We're excited to do this work together. And as Maria said, 30 years in, we have a lot to celebrate, and we have new challenges to encounter. And that's okay. We're going to do it together. So what can we do? Well, shocking to no one, Maria and I have a few ideas. So if it's financially feasible, some things that you can do, you can upgrade your membership. You could even think about making a larger gift if that's available at the $5,000 level or even at that $3,600. You can make a gift to the annual fund. You can attend and bring friends to our upcoming Women and Girls event, because we know that that's one that a ton of folks love, and we've got capacity for over 200 folks, and that would be an amazing room full of strong and amazing women. And you can share more about the foundation and the work that we're doing together with more people in your community, in your broader world, and in the way that you give. We're going to ask for more. There's going to be other ideas, but between now and the end of the year, this is how you can most help us. and help us continue to do this work together. And there's a couple of other events that Maria is going to share about. Maria?
Hold on. Thanks, Cedra. I was muted. A couple other things coming up that will be terrific for you to bring folks to and to come yourselves. Tomorrow, we are having a conversation with Steve Phillips, the author of How We Win the Civil War, at Town Hall in conjunction with Social Venture Partners and Progress Alliance on securing a multiracial democracy. Should be a really interesting conversation. You're welcome to come. We also, in November, on the 20th of November, something called a tour in place, the fog beyond the mountains. So this is an in-person virtual tour where they're going to set us up like a bus, and we're going to go and look at the untold story of race relations in the Pacific Northwest. We talk a lot about civil rights, the civil rights movement in the South. There's also civil rights things that have happened here in our area, and we are excited to learn more with you on that. And then December 4th, this is the big one, pop-up for women and girls. It's at the Nordic Museum. We have lots of space. It is a lot of fun. And I hope that we can see you all there and that you will bring people for your tables. So please, tables, sponsorships, tickets, everything's available online. And we really look forward to having you. It's one of my favorite nights of the year, I'll be honest. And now we're going to get to 2025 Board of Directors vote. Cedra, I think I'm bouncing this back to you.
You are. We got a quick bounce there. So before we move to the vote, we want to talk about the folks that are leaving the board here this year. And we have 3 folks that are finishing up their terms with us. So first up is Christine Atkins, who actually completed her service at the end of June. Christine served as the cabinet chair since 2021 after serving as the pooled fund grant leader and in that joint committee for 3 years. Christine has been and continues to be an active member of our grants and membership committees, including currently co-chairing our member engagement team. And we appreciate that she brought her generosity of time, her storytelling, and her willingness to open her home for many activities. Also ending at the end of this year are Jody and Patricia. Jody Green has been a member of the foundation since 2008 and is completing her 9th year of board service. She has served on the governance committee for that full time, including chairing the committee and in other board leadership roles multiple times. Jody was also very active in our prior strategic planning process, that 9-year ago one that I mentioned, as well as the CEO search that ultimately hired Maria. And she's done a lovely job of helping us deepen our governance practices and the way in which we onboard new board members. She's brought thoughtful analysis, a desire to deepen our work together, and also is a great font for great spots for coffee and hikes. Patricia Chiono has been a member of the foundation since 2014 and is completing her 5th year of service on the board. Patricia has also served as an active member of the governance committee throughout her board service, as well as also working on our last strategic plan, doing a ton of work with our early DEI work and committees, as well as many grant and member-facing committees. Patricia's keen editorial eye and voice, her willingness to help in a myriad of ways, and her ability to get right to the heart of a question will be deeply missed. On behalf of the entire board, I want to thank them for their service. We will miss them, and we look forward to continuing our work together as they continue to be active members of the foundation. Thank you, Christine. Thank you, Jody, and thank you, Patricia. And now I'm going to turn to our new board directors up for election. Our governance chair, Susan Barley, is going to introduce the slate of new directors that have been nominated for board service beginning January 1st. Susan.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Cedra. And of course, I have a few comments. And it is so fitting because our theme is celebrating what has been and also looking to the future and renewal. And so today we get to look to the future with the election of 3 new directors. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Susan Barley. I am the current chair of the governance committee. We have the privilege of working with members who are interested in board service. Just a bit of background, because of course this is also the beginning of my PR campaign. How do we encourage our members to join the board? We do a written open call to all our members currently in the spring. The message is, tell us about a member you feel would be a good fit for the board, or even better, put your hat in the ring if you are interested. This year, we had an information call about board service in June, and many of you stepped forward to learn more about board service. This is terrific because we expect to have board openings every year, and a pipeline of motivated prospective board members is very exciting. We will do our open call again next year. Please look for this announcement, and we hope that all of you attending today will consider board service. The governance committee this year explored board membership with all members who were interested. We thank each of you and are grateful for your commitment. That finishes the PR campaign. Now to the best part. On behalf of the governance committee, I am pleased to present a slate of 3 new directors who will serve starting January 1, as Cedra said. They are Karen Toring, Leslie Rosenberg, and Melissa Marks. You have all received their bios in the annual meeting mailing, and these bios are also on the website. I am sure you joined with me in amazement at how these women fill their days. Rather than repeat what you have seen, here's a bit of my summary. All 3 are relatively recent members of the foundation, and each has ties to the nonprofit world and nonprofit work that is unique and wonderful. They bring diverse nonprofit board experiences as well. And I must say, they each have a deep reservoir of enthusiasm, creativity, and energy to serve the membership as we head into our year of inquiry and action, as we decide who we are and what we can be. This slate was approved by the board of directors at our September meeting and was presented to all membership last month. So I also am pleased to report that we have received sufficient proxies to elect this slate of new directors. However, I would like to ask that this slate be approved by those present today. So I get to move for the acceptance of this slate and pass the baton back to Cedra to call the vote to elect this slate. And thank you for your time. Think about board service. Cedra.
Thank you, Susan. So the governance committee has presented the slate and has moved for its acceptance. As Susan mentioned, we've already received enough votes for quorum, but for the good of the order, we're going to go ahead and hold a voice vote because it's fun and we like to say yes. So our process is going to be that I'll invite you to unmute your microphones here momentarily and vote either A or nay as I call for the vote. If you wish to abstain from the vote, please note your abstention in the chat box. So you all may unmute, and all those in favor of the board of directors slate as presented by the governance committee, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, please say nay. Fantastic, thank you. I am pleased to announce the election of Karen Toring, Leslie Rosenberg, and Melissa Marks to the Foundation's Board of Directors beginning in January. We are so excited to work with you all. Woohoo is right. All right. I would also like to share with you all of the directors that are going to be continuing service in 2025. Here are your member representatives that currently serve on the board and will continue to do so in 2025 and beyond. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank all of these continuing members for their work and all that they have already done and will continue to do in support of our foundation. Thank you, board. And finally, we haven't done this before, but we've been sharing more about the board in general. So I want to also announce our new officers for 2025. So on behalf of Chris Kamanishi, our current board chair, I'm delighted to share the new officers. I will be stepping into the chair role starting in 2025. Janet Fromeyer has agreed to be vice chair and chair-elect. We have Nicole Stelner joining as board treasurer and the finance committee chair, and Melinda Heron returning as board secretary. I'd also like to thank the officers that will be completing their service as officers this year. Chris Kamanishi will be completing her chair year, or 2 years actually, and will become past chair, much like we do with our Pooled Fund Grant Leadership. And Barbara Fielden, who has been serving as treasurer throughout this year. Thank you, officers, and we look forward to working with all of you in 2025. And now I get to turn it back to Maria to talk a little bit more about Go Forward in 2025 in terms of the collective grants. Maria.
Yes, let me just get myself situated here. Sorry, I have several different screens happening. Okay, collective grants 2025, tweaks and new priorities. So we've been working a long time over the last couple of years to build our learning organization muscle. And every year we tweak something else about our collective grants in an effort to make them always a little bit better. And this year is no different. So not dramatic tweaks. The biggest one is probably this one. We had an advocacy task force, if you recall, who did their task force duties and made recommendations to the board, which the board then approved for our ongoing way in which we deal with the advocacy grants. What we will be doing is we'll be adding advocacy to our collective grants. So our collective grants now will include direct service organizations, advocacy organizations, and organizations that do both. Now, we are not funding 501c4s. This is still 501c3s and fiscally sponsored organizations, still those same sort of IRS parameters. But there are a lot of organizations out there. There are 501c3s who are doing more advocacy work, and we wanted to be sure that we included them and let them know that they were welcome to apply. Advocacy opportunities will also, when we hear about them, be included in the member newsletter. That can be from y'all, or it could be from our grantees, so that you are aware of what kind of advocacy opportunities there are out there in the world, in our civic world. And in 2 years, we will reassess this experiment with adding advocacy to our collective grants to determine whether or not this is the change that if we're seeing the impact we want to see, is this the change you want to make? So these are the recommendations. The board did approve them. The language has been updated on the website already and will be in the future. And we'll see how it is going forward. So that was our advocacy task force addition to the collective grants. Second big change is some lighter obligations. We heard that the grant process with our lower number of volunteers to spread out the work had become pretty laborious. So the grant leadership suggested a few tweaks to the process. First, we'll be doing a more rigorous pre-screen by grant leadership and staff as needed to reduce the number of LOIs going into our committees. So they will try to get that number down to 30 or 35 LOIs per priority, which should cut down on both the number of LOIs to read in committee and give you all more time to discuss them in your meetings. Second, we will be having either a volunteer and or a staff member review financials for the organizations moving out of the LOI stage, and they'll report back if something seems amiss or there are additional financial questions that the committee needs to know about. But we are taking that need to really do deep dives on the nonprofit financials out of the committee realm. There was a lot of conversation about that coming from the committee, so that's why we're moving that. We are also renaming our research phrase to just a learning phase. Some lighter expectations about what information members need to be able to find before the conversation stage. So lightening that load a little bit, since we do have some fewer folks able to participate. And finally, to be sure that folks coming in later to the process, so those who join at sort of the learning phase as opposed to those who are there at the LOI phase, so that everyone has the same understanding of the priority, we're going to go ahead and ask all grant committee members, regardless of the phase that they may be joining us in, to attend that initial priority meeting where that conversation takes place, where what do we mean by this priority? What do we mean by, what are we looking for? Where that's all sort of nailed down so we don't have to do it twice. If you have any other questions about any of these items, the grant leadership team can certainly fill you in, as can I. So feel free to reach out as needed, or you can stick around for that Q&A afterwards or come to the one on Friday for more details. Okay. As I mentioned before, things might be different next year depending on how we do this year. So we're changing some of the language as well around our grant sizes. Not because we will necessarily change that, but because we might. We don't want our applicants filling in an LOI without having an idea of how much the grant they're applying for is going to be. So because we cannot guarantee our grant size, we are adopting a no less than or more language around our grant sizes. We're just really acknowledging our reality that we are not an endowment foundation. We are not a foundation that grants all of our grants out of our endowment. In order to do that, we would need an endowment of about $50 million. We do not have that. So we grant out of the money we raise. So what we're saying instead is our collective grant will be no less than $50,000, which is still a substantial gift. Or we could say our collective grant will be $50,000 or more. Now, I'm hoping that we are under-promising and over-delivering, that what we will be able to do is still our $100,000 grants at the top of the ticket. But this way, our grantees aren't applying for grants and not having any idea of what it is that they're going to be expecting. So again, if you have questions, please stick around for the Q&A and we'll answer them all at one go. So it's just a change in language. I'm hopeful that it will not be a change in grant size substantially next year, but it could be. So depends on what happens between now and December 31st. All right, and now the moment you've all been waiting for, our 2025 priorities. What we will learn about and how we will invest in Washington this upcoming year. In climate and agricultural justice, we are interested in learning more about how climate change has impacted communities in Washington state and the solutions those communities are creating. Therefore, we will be investing in alleviating and reversing the effect of climate change on those communities most impacted by its effects in Washington state. In healthcare, we are interested in learning more about systems of mental health care and how young people ages 26 and younger interact and heal within those systems, including systems designed to address youth addiction recovery. We will be investing in culturally relevant mental health and connection building services for young people, ages 26 and younger, including organizations with counseling staff or working with a network of external providers. I want to point out that we took a lot of language from this particular healthcare sort of priority out of our mental health and housing priorities learnings. We learn a lot from previous years, even when the priority shifts, and that has impacts on the ways we think about our different, upcoming priorities. So I just wanted to point out that as a learning organization, we are learning new ways to think about mental health care that I do not think we would have been able to do without that mental health and housing deep dives for 2 years that have now impacted the way we think about youth mental health. And in education, we are interested in learning more about non-traditional adult education programs and services designed to support adults ages 18 and older as they navigate the requirements of employment and civic participation. We will invest in non-traditional adult education programs and educational opportunities in support of such efforts. This may include immigrant and refugee education services. For those of you interested, here are the voting results. It was pretty decisive for both education and for youth mental and connection building. But I will say mitigation for communities impacted by climate change and support for our independent small farmland owners, neck and neck. Your vote absolutely does count. Be sure to vote in more than one place this year. All right. So it's going to be a great year. We're going to learn a lot about ourselves, a lot about the outside world. We're going to learn a lot. We have a lot of work ahead of us, absolutely. And I will be talking about money again in the future. But for now, please keep that member recruitment going. Friends, colleagues, yoga partners, whatever. Keep that member recruitment going. It does make a difference. We got to cover that gap between our membership and all of our expenses. So please remember your $2,500 is not going as far as it used to. Give to the annual fund, upgrade your membership. Pop-up is a great recruitment tool, and there's a lot of light fundraising at this event this year. I'm going to be doing more of an ask. So please bring friends who like to give, as well as those who might want to join. If you are with a company that does sponsorships, we'd be happy to explore sponsorship options around pop-up with you. And of course, you're welcome to buy a table and fill that too. Tickets are only $50 a person. The tables are 8-person tables, so it's $400 for a table. I do suspect that we'll be increasing that price next year, so take advantage and get your 2024 discount right now. So yeah, $50 a person, really reasonable. Committee signups will be coming your way soon if you have time. Of course, only if you have time, please sign up. There's a big caveat. We absolutely understand if you don't have the time. It is okay, we get it. It's not a requirement, but if you are able to make some time and volunteer, we'd love to have your help. Tell people about the priorities. If you have organizations in that you know about that fit within our new priority fields, please ask them to apply. It'll be closing December 6th. So people have a little bit of time to fill out that LOI, and all of that will be going live. We'll be sending out the email probably tomorrow I always say probably because we have to update the website, and that's always a big caveat because sometimes things go awry. So probably tomorrow we'll be sending out the announcement of the LOIs for all of our grantees or applicants. And finally, one last little bit. When I worked at the Museum of Pop Culture, we used to have this saying where we would call people out when they were chicken littling. We saw someone starting to spin up some dramatic tale or what have you about a situation, we would say, hey, are you chicken littling? So in honor of that great phrase, as you go out into the world and you speak to other members or grantees or potential applicants or potential members, please do not chicken little Washington Women's Foundation. Do not tell people the sky's falling. The sky is not falling. The doors are not closing. Hyperbole and drama are not necessary, and in fact, damaging. I'm a planner, which means I really like to get out in front of things that I see coming. But you can't do that. You can't plan well without a good dose of reality. And that's what this was today, right? It's a reality check-in. I'm also a big proponent of transparency, and you as members need to know what's going on in your organization. We have the time and the money and the brains to turn things in a different direction, to figure out the solution to this weak spot. And I am fully convinced we can figure it out if we remember to do it together. I know we can. It's just, please don't blow this out of proportion. This is an attempt for me to be really transparent with you about what's happening in the operations of this organization. So I think that's it. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to open it up for questions. We'll keep the line open until about 2:30 today. Or actually, yeah, until about 2 o'clock today. If you want to duck out and come back, you're welcome to do so. And of course, we'll have that time on the 18th together as well. So I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to end my show.